When my wife left, the house didn't feel empty at first. It felt paused, like everything was holding its breath, waiting for her to come back through the door and explain that it had all been a misunderstanding. I kept expecting to hear her keys on the counter, her footsteps in the hallway, her voice calling my name from another room. But days passed, then weeks, and the silence settled in like it had every right to be there. Emily didn't leave in anger. That somehow made it worse. She said she needed space, that she didn't know who she was anymore, that the marriage felt like something she had stepped into without finishing her own story first. I didn't argue because I could see the truth in her eyes. She packed a suitcase, hugged me longer than expected, and walked out with tears streaming down her face. The door closed gently behind her, but it felt like something inside me shattered all the same. I went through the motions after that. Work, sleep, meals that tasted like nothing. Friends checked in, family called, and everyone told me time would fix it. I nodded and said the right things, but time felt cruel rather than helpful. Nights were the hardest. The house echoed. The walls reminded me of every laugh, every argument, every ordinary moment we'd shared. Her mother, Margaret, arrived a week later. I hadn't expected that. Emily and her mother had always been close, but complicated. Margaret was warm in a quiet way, the kind of person who listened more than she spoke. She knocked instead of letting herself in, even though she had a key. When I opened the door, she looked at me for a long moment, then pulled me into a hug without asking permission. I hadn't realized how badly I needed that until it happened. She said Emily was staying with a friend across town, and that she thought it might help if she stayed here for a while. Not to interfere, she said, but to make sure neither of us felt completely alone. I didn't know what to say, so I said yes. At first, we lived around each other carefully. We shared meals but kept conversations light. She made coffee in the mornings and left the kitchen spotless. I worked late and avoided coming home too early because the quiet still scared me. Margaret never pushed. She never asked questions I wasn't ready to answer. One evening, during a power outage caused by a summer storm, everything shifted. We sat in the living room lit by candles, the air thick with rain and humidity. Margaret told me stories about Emily as a child, about scraped knees and school plays and the stubbornness she'd inherited from both her parents. I laughed for the first time in weeks, and the sound surprised us both. She didn't paint Emily as perfect. She spoke honestly about her daughter's fears, her tendency to run when things felt overwhelming. She admitted her own mistakes as a mother, moments she wished she'd handled differently. Listening to her, I felt something loosen in my chest. This wasn't just my wife's mother. This was a woman who had lived, loved, failed, and learned. As the days passed, our conversations deepened. We talked about grief, about loneliness, about the strange way life can unravel without warning. Margaret told me about losing her husband young and raising Emily alone. She talked about the quiet that followed after Emily moved out, how silence can feel heavier than noise if you're not careful. I realized then that we weren't just filling time. We were keeping each other afloat. One night, I admitted something I hadn't said out loud yet. I told her I was afraid Emily wouldn't come back. The words hung between us, raw and unprotected. Margaret didn't rush to reassure me. She simply nodded and said fear was a sign that I still cared deeply, and that caring was never something to regret. She surprised me in the way she chose to support me. She didn't give advice unless I asked. She didn't take sides. Instead, she created small moments of peace. She cooked meals that reminded me of home. She encouraged me to take walks, to breathe, to sit with my feelings instead of running from them. Over time, I noticed something else changing. I was no longer dreading coming home. The house felt alive again, not because Emily was there, but because warmth had returned in a different form. Margaret's presence didn't replace my wife, but it softened the absence in a way I hadn't expected. There was nothing inappropriate about it, nothing hidden or secret. What grew between us was mutual respect and emotional understanding. We talked about books, about music, about the strange turns our lives had taken. Sometimes we sat together in silence, and it felt comfortable rather than painful. Emily called occasionally. Our conversations were careful, but honest. She told me she was seeing a therapist, trying to understand herself better. I told her I was taking things one day at a time. Margaret never shared details from our talks with her daughter, and I respected that boundary deeply. One afternoon, Emily came by unexpectedly to pick up some clothes. I watched her take in the scene quietly. The clean kitchen, the calm atmosphere, her mother laughing softly at something I said. There was no tension in her eyes, only relief. Later, she told me she was grateful I wasn't alone, and grateful her mother was there to remind us both what kindness looked like. When Margaret eventually prepared to leave, the house felt different again, but not empty. She hugged me before she went and told me I was stronger than I thought. She said whatever happened next, I'd be okay, and she meant it. Emily came home a month later. We didn't rush back into old patterns. We talked more than we ever had before. We listened. We acknowledged the damage, but also the growth. Margaret's unexpected support had changed both of us. It showed Emily that love doesn't disappear when things fall apart, and it showed me that healing sometimes comes from the least expected places. Looking back now, I understand how my mother-in-law surprised me. Not with drama or conflict, but with grace. She showed up when everything felt broken and helped me remember who I was beneath the heartbreak. She didn't try to fix my marriage, but she helped save the parts of me that had been lost in the process. Sometimes love doesn't arrive in the way you expect. Sometimes it arrives quietly, offering comfort instead of answers, presence instead of promises. And sometimes, when everything feels like it's falling apart, the most unexpected kindness becomes the thing that helps you rebuild.